Thank you for joining Open Mic with Eastern Maine Sports, where today we'll talk to Ryan Lincoln about American Legion Baseball. He's had a lot of success in American Legion Baseball. We're going to talk about his teams over the years and other stuff with him coming up. So that'll be coming right up after this. But I want to tell you what's coming up on Eastern Maine Sports. In 2 weeks, we'll have the football preview. That'll come out August 30th. Andrew Hart from Maine High School Football will be joining us, as will Bob Beetham. Hopefully get a few coaches around the area also. That's August 30th. On September 4th, we'll have the opening game broadcast. Stearns and Dexter will be the first night football game ever at Dexter High School, so we're looking forward to that on September 4th. Other than that, we're looking forward to the high school season coming up. We'll have some previews and other stuff coming up here in the next few weeks. I want to say thank you to Newport Glass, Rouse Garage, Rowdy's Paving, Ideal Energy Solution, Derigo Nutrition, Hometown Nutrition, Pine State Nutrition, and Hammond Lumber for sponsoring these podcasts here for you. What we're going to do, we'll be right back, and we'll have Ryan Lincoln on for our Open Mic with Eastern Maine Sports podcast.
Open Mic with Eastern Maine Sports with your host, Mark Calvin.
There's Ryan Lincoln, a five-time American Legion champion. He's coached 6 years, five-time champion. A lot of success. First of all, thank you for joining, Ryan.
Yeah, no, appreciate you having me on, Mark.
Appreciate you coming on. Let's go over the years that you have coached. So again, this past year, the Hampden Junior League champions, great success there. You also in 2025 coached the Old Town Twins Junior League champion, and in 2019 and 20, you were the Junior League Motor City won the championship, and in 21 the Senior League champions, and 22 you made it to the semifinals. But so 6 years coaching, 5 years champion. What would you contribute to that success?
It's all the kids, man. At the end of the day, our job as coaches is try and put these kids in the best positions possible as we can. I've been gifted to have a few teams that have had a good amount of talent, but at the end of the day, for us, it's just been the chemistry that we've produced throughout the season. End of the day, I've always kind of said that I'd rather take a group of kids that bond well together, build the team chemistry, and create a culture throughout the summer. It's more than baseball, and we've been fortunate over the years. We've had a good amount of talent on our teams, but overall, a lot of it has been just the camaraderie that the kids have created throughout the summertime, and they've been fortunate to be successful at the end of the year. And we've been in position, like you said, 5 out of the 6 years where we're in contention to bring home a state trophy, and luckily the kids have been able to pull through. It's been a great experience for those kids, and just happy to be along for the ride. So,
and one of the reasons, obviously you're leading the way as head coach, but you've had for each of the 6 years you've coached, you've had the same coaching staff. How important is that, and can you kind of talk about them?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes down to just the culture that we create and the expectations that we set. Obviously, my assistant coaches have been John Fry and R.J. Robertson. R.J. Missed the 2019 season, but we just kind of collectively, you're only as good as your assistant coaches. I've always said it's been good that we've been able to have a staff that kind of individualizes in certain aspects of the game, which makes it a lot easier for me when I have guys that I can look down the end of the bench and say, hey, what do you think about this? And I've always been a guy that I like assistant coaches that aren't yes guys. They'll go against things that I say sometimes. End of the day, obviously it's my decision in the end, but it's always great to have guys that you can look to and just say, hey, what do you think? And you can get 2 different ideas, or sometimes all 3 are on board, which is great. And then other times, it's just to be able to bounce ideas and have that has been great. I think the other thing is like for the kids, from a standpoint of that, I've always been the type of guy that I coach for the kids, and we've been pretty successful in the fact that when we start in June and then we end in August, I feel like the biggest thing is the kids know that they can come to us whenever they need something, right? So it's bigger than baseball. It's all about teaching life lessons. I use the example that, we're teachers just like, educationally in the classroom, our classroom is the field, right? And we're able to show these guys, hard work, responsibility, taking ownership, a lot of these things that are going to, pay off in the long run for them. And it's just when you get guys that are with you that kind of have the same dreams and aspirations and see the game the same way, similarity and the things that we like to do, it just makes it a lot easier.
And you know, to that point, when you build a team, obviously you're taking kids from different schools that they played at different high schools around the area. What do you look for? Because obviously you have to, have them mesh together too. So what do you kind of look for when you're building a team, and what are the first things you try to establish when building a team?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that we've kind of prided ourselves on in the years that we've done it is pitching and defense, right? At the end of the day, always believe that pitching and defense is going to get you to where you want to be. Obviously, you got to score runs in order to win games. But if you can kind of limit, your opponents to a couple of runs, I mean, this past season was a good example. We had a couple guys that had under 1 ERAs, and our other couple pitchers had under 2 ERAs. So the pitching aspect has been great, and then we were pretty solid across the diamond as far as fielding percentage goes. A couple miscues here and there. They're kids; things are going to happen, but we live with it and we learn to move on. But that's primarily where we kind of look is pitching and defense. But at the same time, we talk about the culture that we want to build and the chemistry that we like to have. So having kids that want to be there, they're committed, their body language is good. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. So we realistically look across the board in the sense of, we might not always take the most talented kids. And I think for an example would be is I look over the years and a lot of kids come in and you ask them, primary positions, and they're like, oh, shortstop, second base. And I'm like, well, you're going to play left field for us, or hey, you're gonna play center field for us. I think like one of the biggest questions that we ask is, how many of you guys have ever bunted or know how to bunt? And you get like 1 or 2 kids that raise their hand, and we look at each other and we kind of laugh because obviously you've seen a lot of our teams, and we do a lot of manufacture and small ball stuff, and these kids learn from day one how to be able to produce when you might not be able to get that gap double all the time. So kind of like in the sense of the fact that we just really look at pitching and defense, and then we kind of build from there. I mean, obviously, if you have a couple of kids that at the plate are lethal, then yeah, we're going to make sure we grab them. But kind of a different wide range of things that we look at to make sure that we're kind of gifted at certain positions, and obviously defensively you got to be strong up the middle. Over the last few years, I've been very fortunate to have great guys behind the plate that not only are leaders on the field and in the dugout, but at the same time they're the workhorse that gets things done.
And sometimes Major League Baseball isn't the best for kids to watch, but in a win over the Blue Jays, the cleanup hitter for the Red Sox, Wilson Contreras, bunted runners over. 2 batters later, they had a grand slam. So when a cleanup hitter can do it for a major league team, you can kind of see you're not too good to kind of lay one down either.
Well, it's funny that you say that. Back a couple of years ago, Jason Libby, who played at Bangor Christian, obviously big power hitter. Guys play him pull. And a lot of teams were playing everybody on the infield on the right hand side, and we looked at Jay Lib and we said, "Hey man, you're gonna lay one down here." And he goes, "What?" I'm like, "Seriously, push one down third base." After he started doing that a couple times, and people kind of couldn't believe it, like, "Oh man, you got a cleanup guy doing that." It doesn't matter whether you hit it 5 feet or you hit it 500 feet. We're looking for guys that are just going to get on base, and that obviously opened up holes for him because. Right center gap was kind of where power alley was to. Typically, they had 2 guys over on that side of the infield, and that were added extras, and we were able to kind of expose people that way. So,
yeah. So he not only helped the team that game, but in future games also, and himself too. So that
right.
Definitely big. You kind of mentioned this as far as culture, but I do want to touch on this. What did beyond the wins and losses? Obviously, you've had a lot of success, and ultimately. Especially in the high school level, that's how coaches keep their jobs. But what beyond wins and losses does coaching mean to you?
Yeah, I started coaching actually when I was in high school. So I didn't play my junior year of high school in basketball, and picked up coaching. And a lot of it was just kind of inspiration from, role models that I had, and in the fact of being able to give back to the kids. At the end of the day, I've coached since I was 17 years old, and a lot of the time it's, I've traveled, 120 miles one way just to coach a team or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's just about giving kids an opportunity to play baseball, and see them become better people. The biggest thing that I like to see is, now that I've over the 30-year-old threshold, it's been nice to see some of these guys that are turning, 22, 23 years old, and I see them, even more successful than I am in the workforce, and some of them have now started families, and working their way up the chain. And I think that's the biggest thing for me as a coach is, yes, winning state titles is awesome, but realistically, the thing for me is just being able to see these guys become successful when they graduate high school, and teach them things about life. Like we talked about earlier, a little bit about, time management, responsibility, working hard, and understanding that, hey, you've got a job to do. When you don't perform your job, then obviously, things are going to happen. But at the end of the day, you take ownership of what you do. And that's the biggest thing for me is just seeing these guys succeed as they get older.
Now, off topic a little bit, you just made me and Eastern Maine sports in general feel old, saying you getting over the 30 year, you're over 30 years old. Because first of all, back in high school at Woodland, you were one of our first athlete of the week winners. This is way back, and
Yeah.
I don't know if you were a senior or a junior, but this was way back, and and you kind of assisted with us back then, right? Either late in your high school, days, or right when you got out. So kind of made me and what we do in general feel kind of old.
Yeah, no, it was good. I remember sitting in the Bangor auditorium, writing articles during tournament week, and yeah, I believe I started with you when I was a junior in high school, and it's not only for me just in the coaching aspect, but just for Eastern Maine sports in general to see where it's gone from when you first started to today. Best coverage in the state of Maine by far, and it's not just about individual athletes or individual coaches or the team aspects, and you guys are covering everything, and it's great to see. So yeah, it's been a little bit of time for sure. Hard to believe, but time does fly. So
Yeah, when we post like the athlete of the week winners, especially if a kid from Woodland wins one,
yeah,
we post the past winners. You always get your name mentioned.
I do. That's right.
No, back to American Legion. And this is kind of off subject too of what we were getting into and kind of what we discussed, what we're going to talk about. But as far as like numbers in American Legion, how do you think we can maybe not we, but like in general, people get the numbers back up? Because it kind of back when you probably started in 19, there was probably a lot more 18, 19, there's probably a lot more teams in general and a lot more kids being involved. How do you think maybe we can get that back to close to where it was?
Yeah, I kind of think back to when I played too. So obviously, I graduated back in 2012, and I think back then when we still had the zone tournaments, we had, I think at that time 3 different zones, which obviously years before that they had a lot more. But I think the biggest thing is, and in a sense, it's not a bad thing. There's plenty of options for kids to be able to play baseball. Obviously, I coach both travel baseball and Legion baseball. One thing that I try to strive to do is be able to make it, an option for kids to be able to play both travel and Legion baseball. And I think the biggest thing is sometimes people get scared away as far as the admin role types of things. Like, oh, I'd love to have a team, but there's so much added extra work. And I feel like the leadership at the Legion level now, Scott Bishop took over a few years ago, and he's trying to do the best he can to make it, very, non-tech savvy. Like you just tell me you want a team and I will basically, make it work for you. So I think that, and we're kind of seeing some programs starting to revive. Like this past year, we saw Lincoln Lumber come back as a senior team. Obviously, this schedule is pretty heavy just because we have, such a shortened season to be able to get games in. But I think that the biggest thing is kids understanding that, there is opportunity in places to be able to do both. I think sometimes people worry about exposure, and I personally can say a couple years ago I wondered the same exact thing for some of my guys, which is why I continued to do travel stuff. But I had some guys this past weekend that were at the junior regional when we were down in New Hampshire, and there was guys there that were getting exposure to college coaches just at that level. So I think that there's a little bit of a little bit to offer in the sense that it might not, if you're thinking about starting a team, it's not as hard as you think. There's people that are willing to help you and willing to make it work. And I think it's starting to increase again. Like this year, we were at, I believe, 13 senior teams and 8 junior teams. So it's starting to get there. The biggest thing that I would like to see, obviously, is the junior level increase more because that's your feeder program. So it's good to have the 13 senior teams, but it would be nice to, see 13 seniors, 13 juniors, and then you got a steady feeder stream. So.
Yeah, no doubt. We're going to get back to Legion, but I do want to jump. You mentioned travel ball and something you're doing in general that you started up recently and actually sponsored with us on our main coverage and also the tournament coverage coming up in February. Scc Maine Athletics. What are you building there, and what's the kind of the goal there?
Yeah, so 2 years ago, just was approached by a few people that were like, "Hey, we're looking for an option to be able to play travel baseball." So I, obviously, like I talk about, I try and give kids as many opportunities as I can. I've been involved in the travel baseball, travel basketball world over the, course of my coaching career, and basically the goal of it is just to be able to give kids an opportunity at an affordable rate to be able to have the chance to play travel sports. My goal isn't to become hey, I got 20 teams for baseball, softball, and 20 teams for basketball. I mean, yes, it'd be great to see that many kids playing, but I'm kind of more so looking at the fact that I can run something that's kind of on a smaller scale, and the fact that hey, we have 5 or 6 baseball, softball teams, we have 6 or 8 basketball teams, and able to kind of scale it a little bit smaller, but basically just an opportunity to get kids to be able to play travel sports and get that exposure kind of at a more affordable rate, I guess.
So it isn't just baseball and softball. You mentioned basketball. What's that schedule? I know baseball and softball is probably in the summer, right? Or is
Yeah.
it fall ball too? I don't know.
Yeah. So baseball, softball, basically we have tryouts for the following year in August. And then we start up the beginning of December and go until the middle of March once high school starts up to be able to practice throughout the wintertime. And then we start back up towards the end of June. Well, it depends on the age group, I guess. Some of the younger ages start a little bit earlier, but and goes until typically the beginning of August for baseball, softball. And then for basketball, there's kind of a few different seasons. So there's your strong season is your spring season. That's when most of the tournaments are going on and stuff to play between Bangor and sometimes New Hampshire or Massachusetts, depending upon the level of play. And then obviously there's a fall basketball option as well. So basically an opportunity to play fall, summer, spring for basketball, and kind of just have teams at different age levels there. I think this fall we'll have teams both at the middle school, high school level, and then maybe a couple of grade school teams. So it's been good. I've kind of had a good following over the last couple of years, and basically this year we're kind of putting it into SCC, kind of making it a thing. So
Yeah, and we appreciate you advertising with us. And as I said, we get your word out there. Now, coaching wise, do you coach? You coach baseball, but you coach like any basketball teams too, or?
so my hope is that I don't have to. I'd like to just kind of be able to sit back and take a little bit of time. Like you mentioned fall baseball. I'm taking this fall off because I've kind of been going since March, and obviously the last few years I've coached travel baseball in Legion, and my thought process right now is hopefully be able to take some time off. But the other thing is too is it's sometimes trying to find coaches can be hard. I understand that between officiating and getting coaches and stuff like that, it's not for everybody. So never going to leave a team without one, but as long as we can make it work, then my goal would be to kind of just administer things and put teams in the right direction and get them practicing and get them out there in some tournaments.
Nice, nice. Well, you're building something very good there, and it'll continue to grow. I'm sure. Let's get back to Legion, and we mentioned your championships. We mentioned 5, out of 6 years coaching, 5 years you won a championship. Does any of those championships stand out more than the others, or different than the others? I mean, I know all are special, but anyone stand out for you?
Yeah, I think the one that, and it's not just because of the group of guys or anything like that, because each year, you get a special group, right? And, some years you're like, wow, this could be the last one. And then the next group comes, you're like, oh, okay, one more. I think the one that kind of stands out the most would be the COVID year one, because that was in 2020. It was a little bit structured a little bit differently. So we had to, it was tough. We weren't sure if we were going to have a season. Obviously, there's no high school baseball season. And, there was a bunch of different rules that get put in about, when you're on defense, you're using your own baseballs. You're not allowed to touch the other team's baseballs. You got to sanitize in between innings, and a lot of it's blended in. To be honest, I don't want to say that I'm getting old and forgetful on things, but I just know that a lot of things were different that year in the sense that we kind of, lined up on the foul lines. We couldn't shake hands. We couldn't get near certain people, and kind of had to keep distancing. And so I think just for the fact that it was different that season. And just for be able to see kids get the opportunity to play and not fully lose out on a whole year of baseball. Obviously, I know some kids did, which is unfortunate, but I think that one kind of sticks out just because it was different, and it was a grind to get to that point. I think we ended up. I think that year we played 18 games. We went 15-3, and we ended up playing a team out of Turner in the championship that year. We actually got down early. I believe we were down 3-0. Had a huge inning, came back to go up. We went up 4-3. They went up on us 5-4, and then we scored 2, I believe, in the top of the 6th to go up 6-5. We were able to hold on to win that, and it was good for the kids. I mean, the kids battled and grinded, and I think out of all of them, that's the one that kind of stands out as far as above the others. Not the fact that it was. Not saying it was the best team I ever had or the best group of kids I ever had. It was just different in the sense that it wasn't what we're normally used to, and it just, I guess, out of all of them, that's the one that kind of sticks out.
Now, you mentioned different guidelines or rules or whatever. Like, was the first baseman able to hold on the guy at first, or what? Like, what was it? What was the rules there?
Yeah, so that kind of stuff kind of stayed the same, but it was more or less, a lot of like you can't touch the same baseballs. When you were, doing your umpires meetings, everybody had to be distantly separated out. You had to sanitize your hands in between each innings, and just some different things like that. Like I said, I kind of can't remember all of the things, but I know that a lot of what we did, that list had to go through, certain people to be able to make that stuff work and get it's okay to have that league type thing. So it was great to be able to have that opportunity.
Now, I mean, I know that basketball season, I know this is different because it was outdoors, but parents and families weren't able to even go in the gyms. Were there people able to be in the stands at the baseball games?
Yeah, so it wasn't really they were allowed in the stands. People had to have their own, like, basically if you went with your family could sit next to each other, but you couldn't sit next to your, whatever. If my parents went, they couldn't sit next to Coach Fry's parents. They had to have their own, they had to be distanced out, whatever it was, 10, 15 feet or whatever. There was kind of boxes that were marked out as to where people could sit. And, you could only have certain amount of people in certain areas and stuff like that. So it wasn't like the stands were filled up with, 250 people sitting side by side. It was, everyone was kind of spread out. So it's kind of like a Where's Waldo type thing, but you had everybody spaced out.
Crazy times. Hopefully we never get back to that, right?
No doubt.
So let's talk about team chemistry. We talked about it a little bit, but like compared to raw talent, how important is culture and team chemistry to you? Like, like say, I mean, not saying this ever happened, but you got a kid that was, obviously very talented on the field, but was a disruption to the other. He didn't fit in with what the other kids, they were all team players. Again, I'm not saying this ever happened,
Right.
But I'm just saying as an example, what would you do in that situation, and how important is it to the team culture over raw talent?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the things that we talk about in the beginning is, we're doing this as a team. It's not an I thing. Um, we kind of need to bring everybody together. The year that I kind of think about that is 2019, so my first season. Um, we in the regular season we went. I think we only won 6 or 7 games in the regular season out of 16 or 18. So we went into the postseason. We had a couple of good practices before then, and basically just kind of told the kids like, look, regular season doesn't mean anything. The best teams come together when it matters the most. It's going to take an effort from everybody, whether it's guys that aren't the 9 that are out on the field, or you're on the bench and you're supporting your teammates, or you get in for a pinch run, or you get in for a pinch hit. Everything's got to come together. Well, and when you have a group of however many are on your team, right, 14, 15, 16 guys that are willing to buy into what you're talking about and are there for each other, it makes when times are tough, it makes it easier. So for an example, that year we lost our first game of the tournament, and we had to battle all the way back. So we lost our first game in bracket play, and we had to come all the way back. Had to win 6 games, and I think it was like 4 days or something like that. So it was grueling. And you talk about pitching and everything else, and luckily we were able to string some things together. Some bounces went our way. We were able to get a couple of timely hits, a couple of errors committed by other teams. Just the kids bought in. It was the fact that they understood that we might not be the most talented team that's out here, but we're the team that we're just a group of dogs. We're going to go out there. We're going to work hard. We're going to grind, and we understand that it's going to take our 110% best effort to be able to get to where we want to be. And I think when you talk about team chemistry, I think that year sticks out in a huge piece because the guys bonded together. We understood that we might not be the most talented team, but there isn't a team out there that's going to work harder than we do. And we were able to go on a huge run during the postseason and really come together and make it work.
We're going to have more with Ryan. We're just going to let you see our sponsors. Be right back.
Thank you to our podcast sponsors, Rowdy's Paving, Rowell's Garage, Ideal Energy Solutions, Pine State Nutrition, Dirigo Nutrition, Hometown Nutrition, Hammond Lumber, and Newport Glass. If you want to advertise during our podcast or broadcast, please contact Mark at 207-270-1314.
Those are our podcast sponsors. Thank you to all of them. If you want to advertise with us on our regular coverage or a podcast or a tournament, please contact me. Again, Scc Maine Athletics. Thank you to them for being a new sponsor during our yearly games, which fall season is coming right up. We're at actually they start tomorrow. Today's August 16th when this is coming out, and fall practices start tomorrow. So just like that, summer's over. That's the bad thing about that.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Hard to believe that we're already into fall sports, but Eastern Maine sports will be on the coverage. So
yes, we will. Thank you, Ryan. Again, teaching different style of play. Like you mentioned, Jason Libby, one of the better players around here in recent years, able to bunt. That maybe? I mean, I know you're talking about it here with us on the podcast, but is that something good to mention to like big time hitters now? Like, hey, yeah, great, you hit 600 in high school, but we may need you to do this, even though maybe your high school team didn't. Is that a good example to give to kids?
yeah, I think that's something that we talk about every summer that we get with kids, or even sometimes at the travel level. Like I've always said to guys, like you can never have too many tools in the toolbox, right? In certain situations, it might be one of those things where I've had guys all the time, like we understand, like we get late in the game and we need to move that runner over to get that run, right? Or a lot of times you got guys at first and second with less than 2 outs, a guy that's up, maybe struggling at the dish a little bit, just needs to see the ball get down, lay one down. We got runners at second and third with less than 2 outs and, a base hit. We're looking at scoring 2 runs. I think that's the biggest thing is, I feel like, and every coach is different in the fact of what they like to do and what they think. But for me, it's in the sense that you're not always going to get that big gap double when you think it's going to happen, right? And the other thing is I've always said it, and you can look back at the article that the Bangor Daily News posted when I lost to Stearns a few years ago in the Northern Maine final at Woodland. is you got to make teams make plays, and I said in that game, we laid down a suicide squeeze that if it would have been 1 foot one way or the other, we might have been talking about being champions that night. And I've always told kids that. And, I feel like that's the biggest thing is at the end of the day, no matter which level that you're playing at, sometimes the easiest plays are the hardest plays. And I've said to guys, small things is what makes the difference between winning and losing. Those small mistakes are the ones that come back to bite you. So sometimes, even though that you're laying down a bunt, a lot of things have to happen, right? The fielder, depending upon the bunt coverage that the team is in, whether they're in a cover where corners are coming or you got your pitcher and catcher covering lines, your pitcher's got to get off the mound. He's got to set his feet. He's going to, pick up the ball. He's going to make the throw. Sometimes you see that ball sailing to right field. And now instead of it being second and third with no outs, now you're talking second and third with no outs and you scored a run. So, being aggressive. And I just think at the end of the day that kids can never have enough tools in the toolbox. And, when a coach comes up to them, and I find it funny because we were, I can't remember where we were. It's one game this summer. I called time. There was a runner at third and less than 2 outs. And I looked at the guy and I said, how do you feel about laying a suicide down here? And he looks at me and he goes, I'll get it down. And sure enough, that pitch got it down. Suicide worked out, and kid walks back to the dugout and biggest smile on his face. Coach, I've never done that before, but I got it done.
And that's the attitude you want, right?
Exactly right. The smile on his face to say, oh my word, like it actually worked. I got the bunt down. I couldn't believe it. That's the type of stuff that, makes it awesome. And that's what gets kids buying in is, confidence, making sure that they understand like, hey, you can get it done. And, sometimes I definitely admit that I'm not the easiest coach to play for because I, work kids hard and I have a high expectation of them, but it's also the fact that I understand that I know, the side of them that they can bring out and where they can be. And sometimes for some that's, not the way that they like. And for others, they enjoy it the most. But I feel like, that's the biggest thing. It's just the fact that you can never learn enough. And I feel that way too. Like, obviously I've coached now with Coach Fry for 6 years and, he's been in a lot of big game situations and, I've bounced ideas off of him and just listened. Like, I go to the senior all-star games, I go to the underclassmen games and just picking guys' brains, asking them like, hey, what do you do in these situations? What do you think? I've picked up on so many things because it's not just for the kids, but for me too. Like, I always am willing to learn and I want to learn. I want to, get better because I want to give kids the best product that they can. At the end of the day, I'm only as good as I'm willing to become. So.
Yeah. And you speaking of learning, what maybe coaches throughout your years, in your history, like playing baseball, basketball, whatever, like were kind of coaches that kind of you think of now when you're coaching, like maybe reasons maybe you wanted to get into coaching in the first place and stuff like that. Who are some maybe mentors like that?
Yeah, so I've been kind of fortunate enough to coach with two of them over the last few years. So when I first started coaching, and even when I was first, kind of playing, I guess, Tim Collins obviously is a big one. This past season, I was able to coach with him, and obviously Coach Fry. But I guess the first one was kind of my dad. I played for him when I was younger, and I saw the time and effort that he put in, not just for me, but for all the other kids, because he was kind of the same way. Like, he was the volunteer dad in the area that was willing to coach soccer, coach basketball, coach baseball, just to give kids an opportunity to play. And I think that's kind of the first thing that motivated me was, I kind of want to be like my dad in the sense that I'm able to give back to kids and, just give them an opportunity to be able to play. But the last few years being able to coach with Coach Fry and Coach Collins, I've just learned so much. Like, a lot of the things that we do are similar in certain ways. I might do things a little bit differently than they do it, and they do it a little bit differently than I do. But I've, been able to learn so much more by being able to be around them and kind of get to where I want to be. I mean, ideally at some point, I'd like to be able to coach at the next level. I've applied for a few jobs, hasn't worked out. But at some point I feel like my time will come and I'll get the opportunity to coach at the collegiate level. But for right now, I'm just kind of absorbing what I can by learning from others and, getting the opportunity to coach at the Legion level and coach travel ball, it's only going to build the resume, a little bit more. But making those connections, has been huge. And, I'm very appreciative of both of them for everything that they've been able to give me and everything I've been able to learn from them.
Yeah, you talked about a lot of success. Those two, a lot of championship games in both of those two guys, right? And they probably have seen. Obviously, in baseball, there's always something new every
Yeah.
day, every game. But they've seen pretty much most situations, and kind of to be able to coach under them. That's only going to help you going forward, huh?
It is. I mean, I think the biggest thing too, and I'm not just saying this because I coach at that level too, but I think a lot of times class C and D baseball kind of get overlooked because of the fact that they don't have, like we talked about earlier, you don't have, 45, 50 kids that are coming out to try out, and 23 of them have played baseball year round, right? You're basically you got, let's be honest, 3 or 4 baseball guys, and then the rest are just kind of multi-sport athletes, or you're looking at that kid who's a track star and you're like, hey, you're just going to come run for me. You're going to be my pinch run guy and you're just going to get me that run. And that's what you focus on. And I feel like, some of your better coaches are at the lower levels because they have to do a lot more with less. And that's just the way that it is. Like we talk about having to manufacture runs and having to be able to limit runs and, just put teams in good situations to be able to get to where they want to be. I just feel like sometimes, the lower levels don't get as much of their due justice as they should, because I feel like a lot of the times, and, don't get me wrong, sometimes you have games that, are, 23 to 19 and they're not the greatest of all games, but I feel like there is a lot of good coaches and a lot of good players that are at that level that might not get the opportunity and the exposure at, some of those upper classes, but they could play in those classes. I mean, I know some kids over the last few years, coaching in Class D that could compete at any level if they were able to have the opportunity. But I feel like, kind of like you said, I mean, those guys have been right there, time in and time out. Every single year, it seems like those are the names that you're hearing that are in a regional championship or, in a state championship or winning a state championship. And I think those two are kind of like me in the sense that we all feel the same thing. It's the championships are nice, but at the end of the day, what's nice for me is I see 5-6 years down the road when I look at a kid. Like my first coaching job was at Penobscot Valley for baseball, and of course, within coaching, there's some kids that kind of gravitate towards you more than others do. And there was one kid for me that kind of was just like my guy, I guess, so to speak, from the start. And, to see him, become a teacher and, now starting a family and getting married and all that stuff, that to me, that's the cool thing. Would it have been great to win a state championship? Absolutely. But to me, it's just to be able to see, hey, you know what? I coached that kid. He's a great kid. It's awesome to be able to see him succeeding in life. And that kind of takes a little bit of pride for me, because when I see them and they haven't seen me in years, they say, oh, coach, like, hey, appreciate you so much. You were hard on me, but I understand now why you were, because now I know when I have to go to work, I got to be there on time. So those are the biggest things that is nice. But I think at the end of the day, that's kind of why I've looked up to those three, and overall.
Now, who was that from Penobscot Valley? Give him a shout out.
I love all my guys from up there, but it was Reese Carter.
Okay, yeah, there you go. And he was a heck of an athlete too.
Yeah, it was Reese. Reese was a good kid. I appreciate him, and I've kind of stuck with a lot of those guys that have been up there, and seen them succeed in the things that they do. And obviously now another kid from up there that was with me was Alex Tash, another one of my guys. Seeing him take on the role of coaching at Penobscot Valley now. Just another guy that just loves baseball and wants to be able to give back to the kids. And it's good to see, younger guys getting into coaching. And, I feel like, he's obviously, as we all do, got some learning to do, and he's on the right track. So
we're going to wrap up shortly. We've got a few more things to talk about. I want to talk about, and obviously you do this for the kids. You do this, but I mean, I think people got to realize how much, especially during the summer. I I think I messaged you by accident a few weeks ago when I was at a Red Sox game.
Yeah.
You weren't that far from this, so you're traveling like to Massachusetts to coach baseball. You were in New Hampshire to coach in the championship. In the championship game this past weekend. How difficult is that to travel? I understand you do it and why you do it, but you mentioned you're in your 30s now. It gets harder as you get older. But I know the reason you do it. But how difficult is that?
I mean, I'd say, the last couple of years, it's kind of gotten a little bit more difficult. I mean, the biggest thing is the shout out to my wife for being able to put up with me to be able to do it. If it wasn't for her support and giving me the opportunity to coach as much as I do, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. But, now we just celebrated my son's first birthday 2 days ago. So now it's definitely getting a little bit harder in that sense as far as the travel goes. But, I've had an ultimate goal in mind since I was younger, and that's to be able to coach at the next level. And I guess for me, it's, I'm just trying to, like I tell my kids all the time, you got to work hard, you got to grind. And even though one opportunity doesn't work, you just got to keep pressing forward until that opportunity arises. And, I think that's the thing that I think about all the time when I'm like, oh, man, I got to get up at 4:30 in the morning to drive to Manchester, New Hampshire, or I got to get up at, 4 a.m. to be in, Northborough, Massachusetts. But, that's the biggest thing that I just keep telling myself. And it's kind of another thing that I, tell any of the guys that play for me is like, if you want something, you got to work for it. It's nothing is ever given to us. And I think that's the thing, the motivation for me is the fact that, the kids like we talk about, but at the end of the day, I do want to coach at that next level and, as much experience as I can get. And, I learn every single day, and you can ask any of my kids. The biggest thing for me is like, listen, we all make mistakes. I made mistakes last weekend when we were down in New Hampshire. I made mistakes during the state tournament, but the first person to admit when they made a mistake is me. I'm willing to admit that to my kids, and just like I tell them, listen, you guys make mistakes too. Do I get frustrated? Sure. Do you get frustrated with me when I make a mistake? Sure. But at the end of the day, we're all in it for one common goal, and I think that's the biggest thing for me that I take away from it is number one, it's always the kids. That's what it will always be. But for me, I think it's just the fact that I'm just looking for an opportunity to be able to coach at the next level. It's just where I wanted to be. And, if that ever happens, I'm grateful. And if it doesn't, I'm just going to keep working hard as I can. And, I'm going to give to whatever program gives me an opportunity to be able to give to them kids.
Definitely deserve a shot in the near future. Hopefully you get that. I want to go back to Legion. You mentioned kind of when the trials out for like travel ball. When do you have in mind what obviously if you're coaching the following year, what your team might look like? When do you start kind of thinking that? I mean, I know you do have tryouts, but obviously you might have an idea like what kids may be coming up that might want to play or already got in your ear they're going to want to play. When do you have that in mind? Like how early?
To be honest, I kind of focus on the group that I have then, but you obviously got to look to the future. So typically, you get a good idea towards the end of July, what kids you may think may be coming back next year, or what kids, may be looking in a different direction or, are graduating or, are going into their senior years and don't plan on playing baseball after high school. So I'd say kind of towards the end of July. I mean, everybody really does. I shouldn't say everybody, but the programs that I've seen mainly do their tryouts in the beginning of August to the middle of August to be able to get things together for the following year. So I'd say towards the end of July. I'm trying, in the back of my head to think, all right, well, this kid's probably going to be here next year. I might need to fill this. I may need that, or most of this team's going to be back next year, but we really could use some more arms or whatever. So always, and always keeping an eye on. I think that's the thing too that I like about coaching both Legion and travel is I'm able to monitor guys' arms. So this past year, a lot of the guys were playing both Legion and travel for me, and the year before, and I was able to kind of monitor their arms, and I know hey, he threw whatever 65 on Thursday, so he's not going this weekend and stuff like that. And I think that's the biggest thing is the wins are great, but also monitoring their arms and seeing where they're at makes sense. So typically towards the end of July, I start thinking about, all right, what are we going to have for the following year? What might be coming in. And obviously we're a new program, right? We've only been going for 2 years. Last year we introduced softball. We've had a little bit of turnover. Things have changed. Things are different. But I was happy with our tryouts this year. Do I think that we're going to grow exponentially this year? No, we are going to grow, and but each year our tryouts continue to get more kids, and that's a huge thing that comes from my coaching staff that I've put together and the people that are giving our program an opportunity. You go back and look at a post that I made on the page like last week, I think it was during tryouts. Is I'm grateful for the amount of kids that have come to try out. And whether they play in my program, they play, over Sluggers, they go to Lightning, wherever, at the end of the day, I'm just grateful to see the amount of kids that are interested in playing, extra beyond school ball. It's just a good thing to see the fact that the game's not going away and there's still a love and passion for it.
And lastly, what I want to kind of touch on with you is your high school coaching career. Your past, maybe your present, and what you're looking forward to maybe in the future. Not just baseball. You had some good success coaching Woodland basketball back not too long ago. So what's your kind of like what have you done? Let's just go the past. You've coached baseball, Penobscot Valley at Woodland, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and coached basketball at Woodland.
Correct.
Yeah, and maybe just talk about that and like what you've done and maybe what your plans are here going forward.
Yeah, so obviously a little bit of diverse background in what I've done. I think like I kind of talked about earlier, it's more just the sense that I enjoy to coach and I enjoy being around the kids. Obviously baseball is predominantly the favorite. Basketball is just something that kind of gets me through the wintertime. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I don't enjoy basketball because I love Maine high school basketball. Nothing like it. Am I the greatest basketball coach? Absolutely not. I'm the first one to admit that. But at the end of the day, I think for me, it's just the fact that, give the kids an opportunity to get out there and play. And just, I enjoy it. I mean, I just enjoy coaching in general. And, I think a lot of people kind of get scared away nowadays with, for a variety of reasons. But at the end of the day, we do it for one reason only. And I think I don't even need to say it. You know what I'm going to say. It's for the kids. But that's kind of where I've been at. I mean, I started my actual like high school coaching career started back when I was 19 years old. Troy Alley was the athletic director over at Acadia Christian School here in Trenton. And I was the varsity basketball coach there for one season. And then I believe the next season, the school actually closed down. But that's kind of where I actually started my high school basketball coaching career. And then obviously, as you touched on, I went over to Woodland and assisted and was a JV for Woodland for a couple of years, took over as the varsity coach for a couple of years. And baseball, I was over at Penobscot Valley for a good john of time. I was at Woodland for a good john of time. I had, a 1 year hiatus where I was at Sumner because it was close to home. But, it's one of those things where, I've coached at a few different places, but it's not been one of those, looking to jump to the next best thing. Just kind of all been revolved around, my life and where I've been working at the time. So, an article that, Ernie Clark did years ago when I was at Howland is I was driving from where I live here in Waltham to Woodland to work, Woodland to Penobscot Valley for a practice or a game, and then driving back to Waltham. And, I was doing it because I had a group of kids up there that I enjoyed coaching and wanted to stay with them. And, it was very taxing, a lot of miles, a lot of late nights and stuff like that. And, kudos to, both my boss at Woodland at the time and, Hutch over at Penobscot Valley. Shout out to him, one of the best athletic directors I've been around. And, he much deserved award, a few months back there. And, but I think that's the biggest thing is just the fact that, I have coached in a few different places. And, as for to kind of wrap up your question, as far as what's in the future, really know what the future holds right now. As of right now, I got nothing this fall, nothing this winter. Next spring, my plan is to be right back at Bangor Christian, unless something, happens in a job that's, potential opens up, could be an idea. But as of right now, my plan is to be back at BC and hope that we can, get back to the state title game or at least to the regional final like we were in this year and get a chance to play for a Gold Glove next spring. And who knows? You never know. I mean, that could change tomorrow with something that could happen. But as of right now, that's kind of kind of where I'm at anyways. So hopefully this winter I might be able to get a chance to get back on the mic on a broadcast with you. It's been a couple of years, but be nice to kind of get back to enjoying a game just sitting on the sidelines. So.
Yeah, that's an all-star coaching staff too. You got Tim leading the way, and then yourself and Cody, and that's a top-notch coaching staff. And let's speak about broadcasting, because you've done some in the past, and again, we hope to get you on there a few games, this winter or whatnot. What do you kind of, as a coach, being a color commentary, what are you kind of looking at? Because are you looking at the game differently than some people that are kind of doing it, you think, or because as you do have that coaching background?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing for me is I kind of look at a color commentator as like an assistant coach, right? So like I give an example in basketball, like, as a coach, as a head coach, when you're standing up on the sideline, you're typically, watching the ball, watching the flow of the game, seeing what's happening. But, as an assistant coach for me, I was kind of looking for like mismatches, like, hey, they're in man, we got a mismatch here, let's get them down in the post, let's do this. Kind of the same thing as color commentary and broadcasting, like, I'm kind of looking at, not so much the black and white, but I'm trying to find little things like that. Like, hey, number 12's been, lethal on the glass tonight. Kind of got a mismatch down there. Might need to throw a couple more bodies at him to be able to prevent him from, just kind of cherry picking there at the rim and certain things like that. I guess that's kind of what I look for. And same thing kind of like in baseball, like, and I guess it's my baseball mind, but I'm thinking situationally, like, right, runners at first and second, less than 2 outs. What has this guy done? Could we see hands here, for a bunt? Could we be seeing a fake? Maybe they're going to try and get something going just to trying to see if, make the defense make a play. Little things like that. I guess that's the biggest thing is, when you're doing color, you're kind of sitting off to the side and you're trying to give people that might not be able to see it, because obviously you do video broadcast, but especially when you're at the tournament and you're doing your radio broadcast, you might have somebody sitting at home in a chair that's, kind of wondering, all right, where do they set up in defensively? Who might be some of the mismatches, little things like that. And I think that kind of equates to what you do as an assistant coach too. Whether it's baseball or basketball, you're kind of looking for those tendencies, or, like for an example in baseball, oh geez, that kid's had trouble, hitting a breaking ball. So we might look to go back to that, double up on it or something like that. Or, hey, that kid's been right side 3 times. We need to shift guys over that way. In basketball, you're looking for a mismatch, or, hey, we might be able to run a trap out of our next make, be able to force a quick turnover. So kind of there's a lot of similarities in the fact of, coaching and broadcasting. And I think, one guy that you had on a lot this past year and I've enjoyed listening to, obviously Brian McDormand, me and him were a good duo for years, but I've enjoyed listening to Peter Murray on your broadcast, because it's kind of the same way. It's I'm sure he sees things in general the same way, as far as, he's looking at it like, hey, you might be able to throw this here, or you might be able to do that there. So it's kind of a generalized same idea.
Yeah, it's great having, be great having you on a few games. It's great having Peter on, having the coach, we have Toby Nelson on,
Yes.
sometimes, and, have that kind of the coach in mind, where, you're kind of looking at the game differently than maybe, I mean, I know the game, but I don't have the coaching experience. So, it's definitely great to have that. And, yeah, Peter's been a great addition the last few years to what we do. And you will be too. And again, you were, before we even started broadcasting, we're kind of up in the, back when we started, been a lot different now
Yes.
than it was then, huh?
Yeah, I remember typing on my little 10-inch laptop that I had there, and I was writing an article. I think the game that I did was actually Callis versus Woodland Girls. I remember doing the article when I was up there when they played in the tournament there, and another one was when Callis, the same year, it was Callis versus Sumner Boys. It actually pops up once in a while on my old things that I have stored on my computer. So hard to believe that was back in 2010. So I mean, I was still in high school, and crazy how time flies. But it just goes to show the time and effort that you guys have put into. Like, obviously you've built a good brand that's reputable and people love, and That's one thing that I enjoy every day, especially now that you're doing the headlines and stuff like that, is I always go to Eastern Maine Sports just to kind of scroll and kind of see what's going on, who's doing what, especially with the scores and stuff like that. And it's a great tool that you've done. I'm grateful that, I'm able to kind of give back to you in the sense of the sponsorship, but it's more than that. I want it to keep the coverage going for the kids, for people in the state of Maine to be able to stay caught up in things that they're doing. So truly appreciate what you're doing. Truly appreciate, Chris and Zach and all the guys that you have working with you. You guys just do a tremendous job, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. Thanks for having me on for an interview. It's been good to talk sports for a little bit with everybody. At the end of the day, I wouldn't be where I'm at without all these kids that have played for me. So kudos to them for winning those state titles. It's been fun being along for the ride and just being able to sit back and let them, they're the ones that they hit the ball, they throw the ball, they catch the ball, right? I'm just there just to try and hopefully put them in the right position to get to where they need to be. So it's been a fun ride, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that I've had. And that was a conversation we had at the end of the game. The state title game this year was, it's my first one was in 2019, and they asked me, Coach, does it ever get old? Does the feeling ever get old? And I said, guys, I tell you what does get old is the fact that I sit here and I just think, man, just another year gone, just another summer gone. And, I wouldn't give up any of them for anything, for the memories that the kids have made, and they'll be able to look back on it and say, man, what an awesome summer we had. And I feel like I get to say that every year, whether we win or lose. Seems like it's always been, a good summer. Obviously, we've been on the winning end of things for a few of those, but it's a ride, and very grateful for the kids that I've been able to coach.
I will say that those kids are lucky to have you, as somebody as dedicated as you, that care about them, and they're very fortunate. I don't know if they realize it or not, but they are very fortunate. And as far as you coaching the next level, if somebody does take that chance on you, they'll be well worth it. They won't be disappointed because they won't get anybody as dedicated as you are to building a program.
I appreciate that. Obviously that's the goal, and at some point, whatever's in the plan is in the plan. So that's the hope. And for now, I'm just going to keep trucking on the road that I'm on, and eventually, hopefully, I get that opportunity.
Well, I want to thank you again, Ryan, and for joining us here today on Open Mic with Eastern Maine Sports, and appreciate you and everything you do.
Yeah, no, appreciate you as always, Mark. Thank you so much. Take care, and try and stay dry on the way out.
All right. I want to say thank you to Newport Glass, Rao's Garage, Rowdy's Pavement, Ideal Energy Solution, Derigo Nutrition, Hometown Nutrition, Pine State Nutrition, and Hammer Lumber for sponsoring this podcast. If you want to advertise with us, our broadcast or our podcast, please contact me, Mark, at easternmainsports@gmail.com. Signing off. Good night.